All right, welcome, welcome, welcome. Once again, let's get into another part of writing, shall we? And so for today, we're going to get into some discussion of quotation use and quotation incorporation. So let's go ahead and get going. As usual, I will be using a metaphor, an analogy to help us uh, in the way that we will approach and think about quotation use. And so we're going to keep the alien voices at bay. And I think it's pretty appropriate as we move forward into our continued monster conversation. But we'll talk about more of what I mean by that in just a few moments. So first and foremost, what is it? What's a quote? What's a quotation? What does that mean to you? Well, it's technically a reproduction of an author's exact words. And there's usually, as we discussed when we were nitpicking with MLA documentation style, there is an acknowledgement of the quotation's origination and where it came from. Whose idea, whose fact, whose statistic, whose intellectual idea, thought, concept, perspective. Why do we use quotations other than your English professor asks you to incorporate them? But when and why might we use them? Well, this is especially important. If we aren't an expert in a field, we're allowed to have all the opinions we want in the world, right? But there are informed opinions and there are uninformed opinions. And if we're trying to persuade someone, even if we just want them to agree with our perspective on whether or not the film that we viewed is a mirror of American society, and in what ways it's a mirror of American society, or if we want our audience to agree with us that our society, some in our society demonize some others in our society because they are viewed as being others. If we want to prove something to someone, we can have our own opinion, but when we want other people to agree with us and to see us as being knowledgeable and informed, this gets to a concept called ethos in critical thought, and that's the credibility, the authority of an author, right? Of a speaker. And so we will use quotations from other experts in different fields to help to support our assertions and our opinions. So then now our opinions move beyond being uninformed opinions, and now they're informed, knowledgeable opinions. And we use the quotations to give authority to our assertions because we have chosen quotations from other authoritative people, scholars, academics, scholarly sources that help to add credibility to what we have to say. Quotations can also, if they're really well written, can help to create more interest or hook our readers' attention, as we've talked about with our introductions and our conclusions. So when should we use quotations? This is really important. I want you to think about how you use quotations in your essays. We don't just riddle our papers with quotations. And please, please, please hear me. Please do not use quotations to make your assertions for you. Much like when we discussed with our paragraph writing, you need to make your own claims, your own assertions, your own ideas, and then you incorporate the quotations to give credibility to those assertions. If you're writing about literature, if you're analyzing and interpreting parts of literature, then you use a quotation from the work of literature to help illustrate that how your analysis and interpretation is accurate or true or supported from within the text. So you want to be judicious with your quotation choice and with how many quotations you use, and that you're using them to support comments, assertions, claims that you have already made. And then we'll talk about what you do afterward. So if otherwise, you can use summary or paraphrase, which we'll talk about in a few moments as well. But you want to use quotations when the language is especially vivid, expressive. If you want to be really accurate, let's say you're talking about something very complex or intricate with different details, or very scientific, and it's better to have the expert say it in the expert's own words. You certainly want to use quotations to help if you're making a claim or an assertion about how things are or should be, and you can use that quotation to help lend credibility to your assertions. It's also nice when you're addressing the opposition in a formal argumentation paper to let the opposition share the opposition's perspective in the opposition's own words. And there you go. So I want you to ponder this. In her textbook, Mary Claire Van Lunen says, quote, quote only the quotable, quote for color, quote for evidence, otherwise don't quote. And so I want you to consider this and think on this. And if you're using quotations as evidence, don't you need to make your assertions first? You have to make a claim or an idea before you can incorporate that evidence. Think of your quotations as some of your examples to help support some of your ideas. And then please, as a reminder, 3 quotations. A single quotation mark signifies that the double quotation mark signifies this is somebody else's idea. The single quotation mark lets us know that Marie Claire Van Lunen was quoted in another work, and we're using her quote from somewhere else, not an original source, not the primary source where Marie Claire Van Lunen said it originally. And then our parenthetical reference lets us know, quoted in Kennedy, this is the source that we read, and on this page, Kennedy quotes this. And so this is a quote within a quote, period, after the quotation mark. Sorry that that picture was out of sorts, so we couldn't really read the cartoon there, but hopefully you got to see it. Lunen continues, when you are writing well, your sentences, so I'm going to mix my metaphors. We'll talk about the alien, well, so you want to think about a couple of things. So first and foremost, when you're incorporating quotations, you're introducing an alien voice into your own voice of your essay. Whether or not you know it, whether you believe it or not, you do have an original voice. You have your own voice. And I'm already getting to know who's who by the way that you write, because you have a distinct way of writing, a distinct way of putting together your sentences, developing your paragraphs, and just your own tone and voice. And what happens when you introduce quotations into the world of your own essay and your own perspective, and it's your own world with your voice, it can interrupt the flow of things. So this quotation is really important. So where I'm talking about, we're incorporating alien voices, we're welcoming in other voices, but we need to cushion those voices with a lead and with analysis, guiding our reader into it smoothly, and then presenting the other author's ideas, and then guiding our reader out of that quotation into our own analysis of the quotation and explanation of how that quotation illustrates the claim in the topic sentence or relates to our thesis statement. And so we want to make sure that we aren't startling our audience. Think about when you drive through a parking lot, or you didn't see that there was a speed bump and you go over it too fast. think about how jarring that is and how startling that is, and how physically it just rattles you. So you don't want your quotations to be like speed bumps. Your reader is following along with your rhythm and your tone and your sentence structure, and then all of a sudden hits a speed bump and goes clunk, clunk right into a quotation, and clunk, clunk out of that other author's sentence structure and rhythm and back into yours. So this last, so think about, I like how Lunens uses the metaphor of rows of knitting. For those of you who might be familiar with knitting, you pull from what's come before and lead it into where you're going, but then also think about it like cushions. You're cushioning on either side of the quotation with your guide, your lead into the quotation, and your lead out with your own analysis. Why bother? I just sort of mentioned all of this a little bit early, but there you go. You have this here. And you also, please feel proud, feel excited. These ideas are yours, and your ideas are worthy of being heard. And therefore, your voice should be the primary voice, the dominant voice in your essay. And that's why you also want to cushion in and celebrate your voice and your ideas. So here's an example. There are a number of ways to lead into a quotation. You don't always have to name the author or the speaker. It depends on what you're trying to do. Sometimes you can, especially if mentioning who the author is will give extra credibility to your assertion, then you might want to go ahead and say that. You like this, according to journalist Tina Kelly. The other thing that you can do is you can set up the quotation. What do you want your reader to be looking for when reading the quotation? So you can see that. You can see the quotation there, the parenthetical reference. We only put the page number because we said the author's name inside of the sentence. And we don't want to say what page number in our sentence. That's cumbersome, right? That can just be the parenthetical reference. But then please look at that follow-up analysis to that quotation. So you want to explain what should your audience pull from, identify, what should be highlighted, how does this relate to the rest of your argument. So you can see that first bit there, and then where the quotation introduction is and the analysis. And therefore, with that intro on one side and that analysis on the other, we have adequately cushioned our quotation. So here, remember, I just mentioned that we can sometimes guide our reader to look for something particular. So this is a quotation from Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream, and it's saying Titania wants to please Bottom in every single aspect, so she gives her fairy as instructions. Notice something. Here we use a comma because this is an introductory clause that separates it. In another example, we said that so-and-so says, so that's called a dialogue tag. If you have a dialogue tag and says so-and-so writes, so-and-so comments, use a comma. But notice this is a complete sentence and we're using a colon here. And a colon is, think of it very much like an equal sign. What's on the left is either being restated or renamed or expressed in other words on the right-hand side. So the ideas are quite similar. They're not exactly the same, but they're equal to each other in some way. So notice this is essentially letting us know what's happening in this quotation, and then here's the actual quotation. Now don't get caught up with this. This is act, scene, line number. That's how you the parenthetical, what you put inside the parenthetical for Shakespeare plays. Otherwise, we would have put the author's last name and page number. And then please take a look at this analysis and how it moves forward into the next idea and how that quotation would relate to what must have come before it. So in this instance, rather than introducing the speaker, our cushion identified the idea we wanted our audience to read when looking at that quotation. So here are different signal phrases, and notice here, remember I said dialogue tags? So Ruth Bader Ginsburg argues, this is a dialogue tag or a signal phrase, and that's a comma. John Lewis insists, comma, and then you can see similar, if you put a whole sentence before, then that has the colon. And then you need that evaluation, that analysis, how it relates to your argument. Now, is it acceptable to add or change information in a quote? If you remember the nitpicking with MLA, absolutely, there were brackets, right? So sometimes we might want to make something clear to our audience because they don't have the context of the entire quotation from the original work. We may need, because of the grammatical structure of the quotation, it might not flow as easily with our sentence structure, so we might want to change past tense verbs to present tense, or we might want to, instead of the word it, we might want to put what the pronoun is, the actual noun or pronoun it's referring to. So usually we want to make changes, we want to maintain the integrity of the original author's intent and purpose and meaning, but we do have some flexibility to make a few changes so that the quotation makes sense within our own writing. So here's another example from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Oberon says, dialogue tag has the comma, and then what does the it refer to? If you're not familiar with this play and you haven't read it before, do you know what it fell upon? So to make it really clear to our audience, we're going to use brackets. And a couple of things you can do. For me personally, you could technically, you can see there, you could delete the it and just put Cupid's arrow. Technically, I like to remain as close as possible to the original and only omit things or change it completely if the tense or the punctuation or the grammar is incorrect. But in this instance, I would keep the it and then just add in Cupid's arrow. And the brackets lets you as a reader know that I, as an author of this writing, have augmented the quotation and added this idea. Now, what if we want to omit information? What is that called? What do we use? Well, yes, you're right, we can. And why might we want to omit information? Well, sometimes the quotations are just too long. Sometimes it's riddled with different examples or ideas that maybe aren't as relevant to what we need the support from, and maybe we want to abbreviate the quotation to get to the nitty-gritty of the idea that we wanted to put forward. But again, we have to maintain integrity of the original intent and meaning. We can't add things to the quotation or omit things from the quotation that would alter the original author's intent or meaning. So how do we express the omission? Yes, if you were thinking about those 3 dots, the 3 periods, it's called an ellipses mark. And please don't forget, you need a space in between each period. So it's 1, 2, 3. Also, you only use the ellipses when you omit information from the middle of a quotation or from the end. If you want to take off the first half of a quotation and just start at one part of the quotation, you don't put an ellipses at the beginning. Just go ahead and start with that first word after you've omitted whatever came before it. So let's look at this so you can see where those 3 dots are, the ellipses marks are, that we omitted some information because we felt that only those 2 sentences were the most important sentences. Now I want you to read this and I want you to think about the meaning of the first sentence. Redelmeinel and Tibshirani acknowledge that their study, quote, indicates an association but not necessarily a causal relation between the use of cell phones, that's me including the word cell to differentiate from a landline, right, while driving and a subsequent motor vehicle collision, end quote. Now look at the omission. Redelmeyer and Tibshirani acknowledge that their study indicates a causal relation between the use. So, has this omission maintained the original intent and meaning and integrity of the original quotation? Not necessarily a causal relation, indicates a causal relation. So notice that by omitting that information, we changed the quotation's meaning 180 degrees, right? We flipped it. And so that is not how we use quotations. If the research, if the evidence, if the facts don't support our claims, then we need to rethink our arguments, or we need to do more research. But we can't twist and turn quotations to try to make them fit what we want them to say. And therefore, we want to beware and make sure that we are not changing the meaning of our quotations. This also helps us to maintain our own credibility ethos, as I mentioned earlier, because we are maintaining integrity and our own ethical obligation to the authors that we're using and borrowing within our ideas. So, what I want you to do as you work through the revision process with your essay, I want you to take what we've been looking at with quotation use and use a critical eye, do some nitpicking, and make sure that you're cushioning your quotations and that you're properly citing your sources and that you are properly punctuating everything. Now we have some alternatives to using quotations, and you can paraphrase, you can summarize, but for each, we still need to acknowledge where the information that we're paraphrasing or summarizing came from. So please, we always want to give credit where credit is due for other people's ideas, just like you would like to be credited for your own ideas. And so even if we're going to summarize or paraphrase, it's Barbara W. Tuchman believes, according to Tuchman, and then you can paraphrase it and then give your parenthetical reference with the page number where the information from your paraphrase or the information from your summary can be found. Now, when we paraphrase and summarize, we are transposing everything into our own words, so we don't use quotation marks. But because the idea that we're paraphrasing or summarizing, or the facts or the statistics that we're paraphrasing or summarizing originated in somebody else's mind, we still need to acknowledge that, give that person credit, and put that in the parenthetical reference. Paraphrase and summary, as I mentioned briefly earlier, are excellent alternatives when we have super long quotations or ideas that we might want to use rather than having a really long block quotation. You should not replace quotation use. You can use it in addition to, but typically if you're doing a really well-researched paper, you should have at least one source per page that you're writing, a minimum, and then you should also shoot for one quotation per page, but really it depends on what your argument is, and you need to think critically and logically about your assertions and what types of assertions you're making and what your expertise is and where it might be useful to add credibility to your ideas if you did add a quotation. But you don't want to go to the other side of that, let that pendulum swing way too far to the other side and just put quote after quote after quote and not have your own ideas in between. So you need to strike a balance with that. And so with paraphrase, I want you to think about it if you've ever been in a cavern or a canyon or an area where you've had an echo. The paraphrase is an echo. You emphasize a number of the same important ideas. You're usually focusing on a central point, and often the paraphrase follows a similar structure and order of ideas as the original. Sometimes it's similar in length, maybe even a little bit longer, but we have to remember that we are putting it in our own words entirely. Paraphrase is very useful if you have some technical information and you want to articulate, or it's very long and detailed and you want to put it in your own words to make it more accessible and readily understood by your audience. Notice that you are not evaluating or interpreting or analyzing with your paraphrase. You're just simply restating the information in your own words, and then that analysis will come after. And then the one thing that can be tricky with paraphrase is if we hover too closely to the original, then we can sometimes use the same words or the same sentences as the original. So if you're going to paraphrase, what's helpful is to read through what you want to paraphrase. If it's a paragraph or part of a paragraph, close it, cover it up, and then just type it in your own words, and then double check and make sure that you didn't hover too closely. Now, if there's any particular word that's very unique to that author, if you might recall from the MLA documentation presentation, Garner, from the politically correct Cinderella work of satire, used the word woman, WOMMYN, and that was very unique to that person. So if you and that author's work. So even in a paraphrase, if you wanted to use a single term or word that was very unique to that author, go ahead and do that and just put double quotations around that word. And for the paraphrase, don't forget to put a parenthetical reference as well. So for your discussion board, remember your discussion board for this week says that you'll have 2 paragraphs to write from a discussion presentation, and this is the first of the paragraphs. So please read through this, think about the reading that you did for this week, and then also incorporate at least one instance of paraphrase from one of the 3 authors there. Now, for summary, you want to think about nutshelling. So summary is when you have something larger, and often we can summarize sections of things, but if we just want to paraphrase a paragraph or something, that's what paraphrase is for. A summary is when we're taking a much larger bit. So whether it's summarizing an entire movie or a chapter from a book or the whole article. And so what you want to do is you want to extract the main ideas, like what's the main argument or thesis statement, and then you can also think about what those major topic sentences, the major points in the body paragraphs are. And what you do is you kind of let go of all of the examples, all of the specificity, and you're doing an airplane 20,000 foot view, right? Looking at the whole, and so you're paring away details, modifiers, non-essential points, the examples, the specificity. Again, you want to make sure that you don't miss out on integral elements of the author's work, and you don't want to change the meaning, but essentially you're putting it in a nutshell for people, and think of a nutshell as something small instead of something large. So here's your paragraph number 2 uh, for the discussion board, and please go ahead and come back to this later when you want to finish up that assignment. So go forth and keep your writing planet, your own universe, your own world of your essay free of alien voices and or cushion, because you're cushioning those voices and not having people run over the speed bumps and jarring everybody, right? Don't you love that I just mixed my metaphors? Okay, well, I hope you have a good one. Thanks for venturing through this with me, and take care.